Mega success followed by an industry-wide disaster, poop-slinging matches about who copied who, and then a complete fall-off. Yeah, HTC had it all happen in the 2010s, but this might be one of the strangest and perhaps most unfortunate of all of its controversies. This is when HTC claimed Apple had copied them. What an absolute cluster of a situation this was. So as I'm sure you're all aware if you've watched my videos or have been around tech in the last 10 years, the HTC One, later dubbed the M7, and its successor, the One M8, were absolute hits in 2013 and 2014 respectively. They changed how we all thought Android smartphones could look, feel, and sound. Critics loved them, and the public loved them, for a couple of key reasons which are important to this story. Android buyers and enthusiasts loved the sturdy build quality in an era of plastic Androids and the great software. They were so revered in fact that a follow-up was surely going to result in solid sales and rave reviews. But unfortunately 2015 birthed one of the biggest tech fumbles of all time. See, Qualcomm Snapdragon chips in the previous One models were great. They were not only fast but also reasonably efficient, and that meant you could focus on the wonderful design, the software, and of course those speakers. The infamous Snapdragon 810 SoC resided in all but a few of the most high-end, top-end flagship smartphones of 2015, including LG, Huawei and Sony models. And the consensus among reviewers and buyers of these devices was that the chip ran way too hot and was unstable in some cases, causing boot loops, force crashes and restarts, and horrific battery life. Samsung was fortunately able to lean back on its in-house Exynos chipsets to evade a whole generation of awful flagship Android smartphones, and actually that generation of Galaxy S series models was quite well loved. HTC wasn't able to avoid this kind of headache though, and the HTC One M9 was a complete flop. Sure, it carried its beloved predecessor's strong looks and bold formula, but it was also, along with being a bit long in the tooth in terms of a design at this stage and unable to innovate, a victim of the dreaded 810 chipset. Reviewers lamented its awful battery life and overheating processor that caused many performance problems. All too familiar if you've been unfortunate enough to use one of its fellow problem children. HTC sales were understandably down with the M9, with sources claiming HTC reduced its component order by 30%, and the company was reporting losses in the first and second quarter. They even had to close some of their manufacturing facilities. It was not looking good for the Taiwanese firm. Leaks started to emerge in 2015 of a new HTC One, a device that posed shocking similarities to what would become the best-selling smartphone of all time. It wasn't subtle. HTC had been developing what looked like an iPhone clone. In October of 2015, HTC announced its new Hero model in the HTC One A9, an upper mid-range smartphone with a cut-down 600 series chipset in place of the furnace that was the 810. It also came with a new camera on the back. The M9's shooter was not reviewed particularly favourably, and so this replacement was a much appreciated addition and generally praised in the subsequent reviews. Journalists found the A9 to be a step up from what was an awful HTC One M9. Good software, a thin and light profile, and a much improved camera. Despite the omission of boom sound stereo front-facing speakers, the inclusion of a very sweetly tuned headphone port stood out also. Critics seemed to generally enjoy the One A9, but there were two sticking points. The consensus was that the A9 should not have cost this much for a device with a mid-range chipset, decidedly so, even if the high-end alternative chipset was a complete disaster. And second, that for many, this was an Android iPhone, clearly a copycat clone of the most popular smartphone ever. Industry legend Vlad Savov wrote a hands-on article for The Verge titled HTC's One A9 is a $399 iPhone running Android 6.0. A headline that was for sure designed to rustle some feathers, and boy did it do that. 2 days later, at a press event in HTC's home country Taiwan, Jack Tong, their North Asia president, would tell One China Times and others that HTC wasn't copying Apple, that the company had already built a metal-clad phone with antenna cutouts back with the legendary HTC One. No, it was actually Apple that copied HTC in terms of that antenna design on the back. The A9 is made thinner and more lightweight than previous phones. This is change, an evolution, not copying, to paraphrase. Because these all-metal phones could not pass radio signals through them, there had to be a window for the wireless systems to work effectively, and that's why smartphones have those little breaks in them. You can actually still find them on models in 2025. And it all stemmed back to this controversial take. Kit Guru, who would write about this news, would actually add an editor's note to one of their articles claiming they wouldn't be surprised if they saw a lawsuit made over this at some point. The similarities were undeniable, but despite the uncanny resemblance, nothing actually came of it. Apple, at least to the public's knowledge, didn't challenge HTC on this, and when you consider the iPhone 6 would go on to sell nearly 250 million, contrasting with HTC's shocking 57% year-on-year sales loss in December of 2015, maybe it's not surprising. Apple wasn't scared of losing sales, and rightly so.
Hello, Editor Ryan here. I cannot believe that I missed this, but that really famous article from Vlad Savov of this year about an objective review, basically laughing at all the people who said, "You're not objective enough in your reviews, why are you subjective?" That incredible article, I believe, has stemmed from the HTC One A9 and his initial piece saying that it was basically an iPhone clone. So check that out if you haven't already, it's so funny. I just can't believe I missed it.
There was largely nothing that the HTC A9 did that its competitors weren't already doing in other more established models. Sure, the build quality was quite nice and the software was an improvement, and to be fair, this generation of Android phones as a whole was unloved, so you could either say it was really easy for them to win and stand out against the rubbish, but also that the general sentiment among Google-powered phones at this stage was at an all-time low. 2016 and 2017 saw much improved devices from many an Android maker, thanks to the now improved Snapdragon chipsets and a return to form from the company. Google would go on to launch one of its most important products ever, the Google Pixel, the device series that has recently been taking the world by storm with its seemingly magic software features now driven by its strong AI presence. And do you know who made the first generation Pixel? HTC. Actually, the Taiwanese firm would go on to make the second generation standard variant as well. Isn't it funny how things turn out? Unfortunately, I have a feeling you've probably already heard the rest of this story before. HTC struggled for years to replicate the success that it not only had with the likes of the One M7 and One M8, but the models that preceded both of these. They were well liked, and HTC was not a niche smartphone maker in the late 2000s, early 2010s. These days, they only sell one smartphone, an underwhelming, shoddy-looking mid-range model, though their success in the last decade has really been down to the very popular HTC Vive VR headset. A real oddity if you told people back in 2014 that HTC would be hanging its hat on a computer gaming peripheral. The HTC One A9 is a tale of unfortunate proceedings. A bold, maybe even borderline insane move to potentially copy the best-selling smartphone of all time, and then come out in the media and claim the opposite. A device that, in a vacuum, really doesn't stand for much, but in the history of the company and of the market as a whole, in the context of this whole story, is quite frankly a ridiculous product.